This is Jan Flesher. I am the president of Flesher Marketing Infrastructures, and today Cosential has asked me to present on business process planning for a successful CRM. I, for obvious reasons, have used Cosential as my example product here, and we'll kind of move through things as best we can and as quickly as we can. My background, I've had my own business on and off since about 2000. I've been in the AEC industry for about 25 years. I started out as a spec editor, so I've kind of been from the, I think the lowest end possible you could probably be as a spec editor, to marketing director, sort of, and everything in between. I specialize in aligning strategies with marketing tools and tactics for firms. I'm a big believer in using what you already have to its fullest potential, whether that be systems, technology, or people. And I am a contractor to Cosential on some of their larger implementations. And just as a side note, I'm kind of a technology geek. I like to have all the gadgets and that sort of stuff. So business process planning, as far as any CRM system is concerned, is basically getting yourself organized before you ever buy technology or before you ever implement. And Bill Gates said it well, you know, that the first rule of technology is that when it's applied, any kind of automation will make an efficient business. It's going to be even more efficient and magnify that efficiency. And on the converse is that if you apply it to an inefficient operation, then it's just going to look even that much more inefficient. And that's so true with CRM packages. So many people just think they can buy technology, throw it into the mix, and everything will be fine. But business process planning is really about looking at how your business is structured and how it runs. And if you've ever changed jobs in the AEC industry, you know that even if you go from one construction firm to another, it's very, very different on the business process side. Yes, some system technologies are different, but really on how people do business is based on the founders of the firm and how they thought business should be done. And that tends to go through their succession planning as well, because that's how the next people in line have learned. So in order to do a successful implementation, you definitely need a straightforward kind of game plan. And the part that everybody sort of forgets is this business needs strategy assessment. Then you would go on to configure something like Cosential, scrub your data, test it, and then implement and go forward with maintenance. So we're going to concentrate on this first step, you know, business needs and strategy assessment sort of thing. As many of you probably have realized, the multitude of firms that are out there, many of them are not founded by business people. They're usually founded by somebody who is either a really good engineer, architect, landscape architect, contractor, whatever, who wanted to have their own business. It's not that they were schooled in business necessarily. In business schooling and in marketing schooling, and you know, in the higher education system, tells you that you need to focus on product, your price, your placement, and promoting it. So those four things, and when those four things are aligned and in sync, you will have a very successful business. Well, as economies change and things like that, when this stuff kind of gets out of whack, things can kind of go haywire. So what we want to look at is how business has changed. It used to be, back in the Stone Ages, right, the good old boy connection where you'd go to your neighbor or you'd know your buddy who was a developer and you'd say, hey, he'd say, hey, we're going to do this thing. You'd say, great, handshake, get it done. You know, late 70s, through the early 80s, marketing departments started being set up. Before then, there really weren't. It really was just sort of word of mouth. Marketing came in the 80s, and then in the late 80s, it changed to sort of client care. We're going to take care of these core customer clients, and that's all we're really going to care about, are just these folks, and everything else that comes to us is nice, but not our real focus. And then basically here to what we're dealing with now is client customer relationship and client relationship management. The sales process for client relationship management and the business planning part of that has been part of product sales for years and years and years and years. They've been way ahead of the relationship business with products. But even now, we've seen, if you take Amazon as an example, they used to sell music and books, right? And now they sell service. How can I get my stuff faster, cheaper? Where can I get it through one place? Go to Amazon and I can buy anything from 18 different stores. You know, now they're looking at their client relationship portion much more toward giving good service. And service is really the key. And these CRM systems can really do that well for you if your basic business planning has been reviewed and you integrate that system within that business that's already there. So it really does need to have a balance of what your business practices are and your technology tools and get those ingrained and incorporated. One of the things that happens often in CRM systems, or really any new technology tool other than your accounting system, is a company will buy it, they'll implement it, and then all of a sudden there's all these new processes and all these new steps, and you hear people complaining about, I now have 5 more things. You've just added, so I thought this was supposed to help us. You've added 5 more steps to what I have to do for a living. That's not what we want to concentrate on. We want to concentrate on getting a really good plan in place so that we help communication, not hinder it. So we want to mend the gaps that are already broken, as well as potentially create new avenues of communication for people. And in the digital age that we're in, there is an awful lot of synchronicity that can happen. Some of it's warranted, and some of it's you don't want the synchronicity just because you can. That's sort of like using a coupon and going out and buying everything you have a coupon for, even though you really don't even use those items. So there's some balance there as well. So rules of thumb for business process planning is that you've got to, and with CRM systems, you have to have senior management involved. This can't just be handed off to the BD people or just to the marketing people or to an administrative person. It has to have senior management commitment. And that commitment is more than the nod of the head, yes, go ahead and buy it and do it. They really need to be engaged. Each firm is definitely different. We've talked about that. And the key here is that the CRM system and the business planning around it needs to reflect the direction and strategy of the firm. If it does, then it's much more easy when direction and strategy changes to adapt. You also need to kind of think of the big picture and the future. You know, years ago, there were people who were putting gravel in the bottom of ditches and putting dirt over it, and they didn't call it a green bioswale. They called it a ditch with gravel and dirt on it. Now we call it green. Now we call it, you know, now it's a piece of lead if it's even further along than that, etc. So you need to kind of think of trends and keep that in the picture of what the trend is for your business and your strategy so that that can be incorporated. And the biggest key is that often firms have had various systems in place that either didn't work, maybe were outdated, weren't updated, or you had several people who used to work at a different firm that had this great system in place and it worked well. Well, all of that's fine and well, but usually those people who are really keen on using the same system they used from the last one probably weren't there during the implementation and don't know the painstaking sort of lessons learned from that. So the trying to remain unbiased is pretty big deal. So often the elephant in the room is usually marketing or business development is charged with doing the CRM implementation, and when you start saying business process planning, they're like, well, I know nothing about it. I don't know what happens after we win the project. I check in maybe toward the end of the project to see how everything's going, but you know, the checks and balances that happen once we win, don't know anything about. CRM systems and the business process planning portion of it needs to tie all that together. So the elephant in the room is you have to have project managers in on this as well. Whether they're going to physically be using the system or not, whether now or in the future, doesn't matter, but you really need their insight on how things, what the processes are within your firm, in your company, for moving business forward. So what you need to, how we need to start business process planning is getting the right people involved and looking at how you currently do business. How is it we get a job number? How is it, and it's amazing, every company gets a job number differently. There's always some super duper code to it, like the client number, the first 3 digits or 4 digits now is the year, and the next is a client number, and the next is something. Some of them are very long, some of them are really short. Your new business, it probably just starts at 1 at the beginning of the year and keeps going. How do you do business? How are things organized currently? How does finance organize things? That is kind of a big deal, especially when you're looking at synchronicities or some economies of scale, which means how can I use the same things again and again and not create new things. When you're looking at processes, you want to look at the processes that finance uses, because maybe you can just build a couple things onto that and not have to develop a brand new process that everybody's going to hem and haw over. What tools are currently used in your business right now, whether that be Excel spreadsheets for managing workload. Some people have technology packages for everything. Often the bigger accounting packages have pieces and parts that do, timesheets and scheduling and things like that. But what are all those pieces and parts, so that you get you want that very large view of your firm and how things are done currently. And you want to start at the lead. How do you get leads, to how do you win the project, to how the project is delivered, and how you touch back with that client. And then, the keys are from there are going to be, we're going to look at how do you fix it, what do we need, balancing needs and wants, and what kind of budget and time frame do you have for the whole system implementation while you're doing this processing. So most people say, you'll get in front of project managers and they'll go, we're supposed to use a CRM system, not really sure. I know it's supposed to organize our contacts and companies, and that sounds good, but I'm not sure how it's going to apply to my everyday life. And that's part of this planning effort, is to see where you can integrate, particularly at a level like a project manager, where can the CRM system integrate and touch their everyday life. So one, they develop good habits of how to use this system, and 2, that they develop good data that they're inputting in and see the value of it. Because as adults, if we don't see the value of it, we are not going to do it. Children will blindly do things that you ask them, at least until they're teenagers, and then they won't do anything for you. But adults have a real problem if they cannot see the value at the other side as to why should they do this front end stuff. So you definitely don't want this type of a meeting to start. Construction firms tend to dive into CRM a little better because they already have a business philosophy of client relationship management. It is a business philosophy supported by the technology. It's not just something you go out and buy and magically happens. If your culture doesn't support client relationship management, that is the foremost thing of how you get your business, then you will have a very hard time integrating a system. Often, if the culture doesn't support it, what I've seen, and it works for a while and works fairly effectively, I've seen marketing departments go ahead and embrace the CRM portion of it, and it's usually with smaller firms, and then the marketing people tend to do everything within the CRM, because the project managers are emailing them conversations, copying them on conversations about projects or about upcoming work or whatever. And so then in the back end, without the project managers probably even being aware, marketing is doing all the CRM side, and they all of a sudden, somebody asks about a company what have we done with them, and immediately marketing and pull up the stuff, and they're like, wow, how'd you do that? Well, it's our CRM system. And in that way, you can slowly, hopefully, build in that culture to your firm. You kind of back into it. Not the most effective. It's much better if from top down your company embraces the business philosophy of CRM. So as we look at how your business is being run, we're going to look at what needs to be fixed, what kind of reports are out there already. Often there are tons of reports that have data that marketing wants, that marketing just doesn't get the report. So how can we kind of pony onto those or piggyback onto those reports or processes in order to feed the CRM machine? And then how are your marketing processes and BD processes going to be impacted? Some firms I've had say a mandate per se that everybody is going to log every conversation they've ever had with anybody into the system. Well, just that sort of mandate sort of puts a kibosh on stuff that people are like, really? That just seems, beyond what I need. And when you get into different business groups within your firm, some of them need that, some of them don't. Especially if you have different functions within your company, if you had a design build faction to your company and an engineering faction to your company, both those are driven by two different sources of work, as well as their business processes are different. So you'd have to analyze both and see where that middle is, what equals what is valuable to both sides, and try and meet someplace in the middle so that it's the quality of the data is there, the usefulness of the system is there, and the people will embrace it as having some value to their everyday life. So this is a image that I have gotten. If you look in the lower right hand corner, it's Content Marketing Institute. I actually borrowed it from their website. They put it out on social media, but it was a really good sales process sort of image, that you start down here at leads, and then leads move into opportunities, and AECs don't really like the word sales, but that's really what is happening here. You're negotiating your contract, you're figuring out rates, etc., that you're going to be pinned down on, and then basically when everything's signed on the dotted line, these people become a customer. And then you're really focusing on, are they satisfied, how can we retain them, and then what's the next project. And where you want clients who start as visitors of your firm, they sort of know you, maybe not, you want them to become the evangelists of your firm. You want them to say, oh my gosh, you need to use XYZ for your next project, when they're talking to their friends. So from a business planning side, you need to determine, how do you get leads? Sometimes it's a lead service, sometimes it's by networking, so, there's a variety of ways you do that. But then once you get them, what is the communication around that once you have it? Do just a bunch of emails fly around? Is there a spreadsheet? Contractors often use bid lists. Hey, what's the bids we have to do in the next 6 months? What's out there? What are we pursuing? What's in process, etc. And looking at them for moving that lead to an opportunity, what kind of reporting do you do? Is it an Excel sheet? Is it just word of mouth that 2 or 3 people get together and they talk about it every week? Maybe it's every month, depending on your business. And then the key that most marketing and business development people may not be aware of is over here, after you've become a customer, you have a customer and the project is actually ongoing. It's what are the milestones? What are the processes that can feed or become triggers within a system like Cosential to make you aware of, hey, this is a good point where I can collect data, or gosh, this is I can see that we're halfway through. I need to check in as a business development person back with that client. What are triggers that the CRM can actually help you with on checking back, fixing or enhancing any of the pluses that the client has on the project, maybe using those for future marketing materials or getting a quote, that sort of thing, and then finally upselling. So these are the kind of the areas that you really need to look at and explore of the things you don't know of how your company works. And it gets much more complex when you're looking at your business processes, when you have different multidisciplines, they market differently, but they also run a project differently. Civil engineers are often the very first person on a project because they're doing some kind of permitting for a facility or even roadways, and usually, at least on the building side, on the facility side, they're one of the last ones to be finished because they're the last ones doing, helping with the landscaping and all that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, structurals, everybody else, envelope, they're all done and they're already on their next project. Civil's still on their process. Architecture the same way. Once it gets into construction, they check in. Once the building opens, they're still around, but really, if you look at the sheer volume of how many people from an architecture firm are involved in the front of the project as compared to the back end, there's very few. So what are those processes? How do you do business? So defining the business goals for a CRM is fairly, it's indicative of any CRM system, but accountability is pushed to everyone in the firm. Now that often scares people, but the key is, what kind of accountability? Is it just the head nod and the verbal of, I expect you to do this? And is there a if you don't then? Oftentimes there's not, and there doesn't have to be. It really is dependent on your firm. It's dependent on how that management is engaged. It could be, some people like to see some accountability pushed through to performance reviews. Other people just know their folks that if they say they're going to do it, they're going to do it. Or is your CRM, other business goals is, do you want it to link to other systems like your accounting? And what kind of impacts is that going to have? How does that change the accounting process or the project accounting process? What kind of advantages to, say, a project manager does it have on the CRM side if it's tied to that accounting system? Do they only have to address data in one place and it shows up in multiple systems? Those kind of things. That's what we call economy as a scale. Is anything going to be eliminated or replaced? Often when you incorporate a CRM system into your firm, you will get rid of some things that are part of the process. I have a firm currently who uses an online tool to that has an access back-end system just to regulate some numbering that they use. Well, that system may or may not be needed in the future when their CRM is up and running. It's a potential on the hit list of end of life of getting rid of it and maybe simplifying some things. Again, trying to drive things through the CRM system so that it gets to be everybody's daily activity and ingrained as part of their work as well as a valued part of their job. Who's going to use your system? Is it going to be one or more offices? The more offices, the different locations. Again, you might come across different business processes, because I worked for a firm once that had an office in Phoenix, but that office only did K through 12 work, where K through 12 work was never done in any other part of the firm in the rest of the country. So their business processes, even their sales process, was much different than anybody else's. So that had to be taken into consideration when looking at how the system is going to be configured and used. And then mostly, who's going to be responsible for maintaining? Often it falls on business development and marketing people on the opportunity sides and those kind of things. When you hook into systems like your accounting, that can impact that, where some of that maintenance is actually upheld through the normal accounting processes that happen as a job goes along its way. So how is that going to be handled? And you always want to look at, if anything were possible, what analysis would you like to see? What kinds of things, if I could today see what projects or what kind of dollars, do I want to do revenue forecasts? Gosh, that would be really nice. I know a lot of firms don't do that, or the owners and principals kind of have a gut check on it. Like I kind of think I kind of think it's gonna, this is what we have for the next 6 months or not. This is what I think is coming down the pipeline for projects to chase, but I'm not sure. Would you really like to do some analytics on the projects either that you have completed or even things you've won or things that are in the pipeline? What would those be? What would you like to see? What kind of analysis would be helpful to strengthen your strategies, or maybe point out things that are you've spent so much money trying to chase this one new client, but yet the next 3 projects they're going to put out isn't going to even make a dent into what you spent. Is it worth it or not? If you could do that kind of analysis, that could be extremely helpful. So this is what we don't want in the business process planning, is that, business development is going to beat up on marketing or vice versa. It needs to be definitely a symbiotic relationship that both get along, both can agree on what's important. And the key to that is, just knowing the strategy and the direction of the firm. Where does the firm want to go? And that pretty much settles out this. Sometimes this is more like marketing, and this blue guy would be accounting. Accounting wants things certain ways because they have financial obligations to report to the IRS, to the principals, to a variety of other taxing organizations, state, local, etc. Where can those, soothing those relationships, getting everybody on the same page is what really the business planning portion is about. How can you work together and not create a whole bunch of new stuff just to have the CRM system work, but build on what you already have and take advantage of it. So evaluating existing processes and data sources, it's what's going to be reworked, what actually has to be created to support the CRM system. If it's something as simple as everybody gives the business cards that they get to, say, the receptionist, and she has a card scanner and asks them a few questions, gets it in the system, if that's the easiest way, if sort of Outlook integration is an easier way. For some people, not everybody. And the nice thing is with CRM systems, particularly with Cosential, is that it can be tailored to the individual. So if one person wants somebody to enter in all their contacts from their business cards, great. If somebody else is really sort of a bit more either technology savvy or potentially controlling, they want to enter it all in and make sure it's all how they want it, that's great. Then things like the Ethnos connection, Outlook synchronization is great for them and not for the other person. Everything can be pretty tailored. The dashboards can be tailored. The grid systems can be tailored for how they can use it and what's going to be most useful and, again, valuable to them in their everyday work. So the other thing with the business stuff is that everybody's had a system put in, whether it's a new accounting system. Most people have transitioned. Most firms have at least had a couple of them by now. What worked? What kind of training worked for people? Engineers learn different than architects, who learn different than contractors, and then there's that mix in between. As adults, we have a hard time learning without repetition. So how are you going to accommodate that? We need to learn from what we've done before in the firms. And often you may not be the person to ask because maybe you haven't been there that long. Maybe you didn't sit through that. So find out who those people are who have been around for a while and see what worked well. And then basically you're going to need to do a quick inventory of what you have. What systems do you have? How are they set up? What do they do for the firm? Could potentially integrating with a CRM system, what kind of changes might that make? And then see if that would make that whole system still run smoothly. The last thing you want to do is interject something that's going to just, bog down the whole thing, or make it fly off its rails, sort of thing. Just go off in a different direction. Most people through a sales cycle and in business process go through defining markets. You define your marketing segments. Segmentation is, basically which profiles are you going to go after. You end up then targeting, right? So your CRM system is going to do the whole thing. You want it to help identify those marketing segments. Then you want it to help you focus in on what are the targets that you're looking at, and then basically how can you be best positioned. And often it's what we don't know about projects, clients, etc., that CRM systems can help us with. And what we don't know, we usually find out oftentimes during a project we've had with them if it's a recurring client, but there's no way to capture that information. And that's where this planning and looking at your business processes can help maybe pull out some of those things and keep them where that data is actually useful in looking at the next project or positioning yourself for the next project or a client that is very similar to your last one. That's really where this area, particularly down here in this marketing positioning, that's what CRM is all about, is making sure this, after you've targeted, is really the best it can possibly be, and that's about sharing information. So when you look at your various systems or segments of things, you're going to see, how the various components are set up. Client types are often how companies are. And these might be systems that are set up at paper. Often we had filing cabinets upon filing cabinets. Hopefully we've gotten rid of a lot of that stuff, recycled, and made everything electronic. But the old strategy, you might have gone after people by the type of client, but really, what's your new strategy? And where this old and new strategy comes from is often this area right here, old strategy, is from the marketing department. And it's in the marketing department and organized this way, most likely because whoever sat in the chair first that's what worked for them. More often than not, the organization of a marketing department is not set up or defined by how the company strategy or the company organization works. There's a lot of reasons why. People get thrown into the fire and they need to get up and running. So you create systems that work best for you because you got to kind of CYA and get proposals out, and it's a churn and burn sort of thing. Often it's just over time, and what worked for somebody works sort of for you, and then you tweak it, and then if you leave, the next person in the chair can't understand whatsoever because they're not you. If it's set up as a new strategy of how the company works, one, it frees up some time to think and do about other things, as well as if you add people to the marketing department, business development, whatever, they can easily adapt, learn the company while they're learning the strategies and the organization. So often there's some fixes in here that are going to be required to either look at your, if you already have databases or you already have a CRM system, if you're looking at reorganizing it, figuring out where those components, the old strategy of how you have them organized, how they need to be organized to reflect the direction of your company, and then what are you going to need to do to fix it. So really, you inventory and you analyze and you figure out what needs to happen, and then you test. You say, gosh, did it work? No, let's go back. So to have a game plan, to have a business plan that's going to, the business planning analysis part that's going to prove more beneficial on the back end of your implementation than it is the front end. It will help you define where you need to place data in order to support the planning efforts, to support those check-ins, those triggers, etc., that are identified through the process. But you've got to have a plan together, and you can't do that without really looking and analyzing your organization. It might be really simple. It might be pretty straightforward when you start asking people and acknowledging and finding out how things work. Others, the larger the organization, the more geographically diverse and market diverse it is, the more complex it is, but yet those things that are the same for the various operating groups are going to be, easily defined and identified, so that maybe you can take advantage of those because people are already used to doing something. If you just ask them to do one more thing as part of that process, it will actually help integrate and keep adoption rates a little higher than normal. So that's basically business process planning. It's much more thought-provoking about how people operate, how your business operates, and how you can find those like things among business units, geographic regions, market sectors, disciplines, however you carve up your business. So if you have any questions, please send me a note at jan@jflesher. I'm happy to chat with you about it. I really thank you all for attending today.